In 1957, the US government thought that it would be a good idea to nuclear bomb a huge swathe of American soil. This is a matter of public record. I know I entertain a lot of crazy shit on this show, but that's just true. But several years later, on June 13th, 1976, in Dulce, New Mexico, Officer Gabe Valdez of the New Mexico State Police received an interesting phone call from a local cattle rancher. One of his cows had been killed the night before.
I'll call the sanitary board for you, since it's only a dead cow,
Officer Valdez told the man. That's when the man said something to Gabe that would start him on an investigation that would last the rest of his life and still remains unsolved to this day.
It's much more than just a dead cow. I've been ranching my whole life, and I've never seen anything like this before.
As if this show wasn't already getting ridiculous enough, around the same time, a lot of people in the Dulce area were reporting seeing strange lights in the sky. And some of them even remembered having been abducted by aliens. All three of these insane phenomena may very well be linked. Welcome to the Woo, There It Is podcast. We have to understand more about that dead cow that was found that day. The rancher, whose name is Manuel Gomez, he'd been ranching in the area for many years, so he had a lot of experience. And he'd found that cow that morning. What he noticed was that it was clearly not a wild animal attack. All of the cuts on the cow were just fine cuts, not gashes or tears like what you would expect with animal teeth. And weird parts of the cow were missing, like its reproductive organs. The other thing that Manuel noticed was that there were these round impressions found in the dirt nearby. The dirt was very hard. So the fact that these impressions went into the soil pretty deeply meant that something that had some weight to it must have been placed there, or he thought landed there, because there were no tracks leading up to it. It just kind of seemed to land there as though it had flown there. And it was probably a tripod of some sort, because it was 3 marks. And you could see that there were prints from the tripod to the dead cow. But the nature of the prints, he doesn't really describe. It sounds like it wasn't footprints, it wasn't animal prints, it was something unexplained, but clearly some sort of pattern leading from the tripod to the cow. And he also saw some weird yellow, oily substance. A lot of these clues never really get fully explained. And so your guess is as good as mine as to what that yellowish, oily substance was. Manuel Gomez found the cow that morning, and by the time he called Officer Valdez, it was later in the day, and Valdez said, well, we'll go tomorrow morning to check it out. And when they got there, it was very clear that the tripod had actually returned. And now the cow's ear had been removed, left ear, its tongue, its udder, and its rectum had all been taken as well. It's stated that it was removed with surgical precision. There was also a puncture wound on the brisket, but probably one of the strangest details of them all was that there was no blood. Not even a drop of blood was found. And not long later, Manuel Gomez would find another dead animal, and over time he would end up losing 17 animals, including a horse. But it wasn't just Manuel Gomez who was finding fucked up cows in the pasture. Other local ranchers in the area were finding them, and actually they were being found all over America, from Kansas and Alabama all the way over to Oregon. Cows that had been mutilated. Who was doing this and why? And first of all, we have to talk about some of the clues that were found at the sites, on the cows themselves, as well as some of the strange things that were happening in the area at the time. This story became pretty popular, and Gabe Valdez would sometimes be interviewed in the news about what he was finding. And he noticed that one time he said, well, I think that there are clamp marks, because the backs of the cows' legs are broken, and it would appear that there are clamp marks from, and he believed that something was grabbing onto the cows and then lifting them up. And what Gabe Valdez noticed after he said that on the news was that the clamp marks seemed to be made sort of lower down towards the hooves. And he thought that somebody was watching the news, thought, oh, I need to cover up the clamp marks. And so they started making them towards the cow's hooves to conceal them. The other weird things that were found was at one point they found a packet of radar chaff. And radar chaff are these fine particles of metal. I think whenever you are flying a plane that you don't want to be detected on radar, you can actually disperse this. It will block radar from being able to detect the object you're flying. Gabe Valdez wrote in his notes that apparently when they talked to the Air Force about where this radar chaff had come from, the Air Force said, wait, that's radar chaff that we only use specifically for experimental craft. And he said that they were very keen to know where Gabe had found it. He just found it plunked down near a mutilated cow. And at another time, literally a packet of radar chaff was found stuffed in the cow's mouth. And at another site, they found a gas mask. So at some point, you're kind of starting to wonder, are they leaving these clues behind on purpose to kind of throw things off? What is going on? Valdez would send samples of these cows in for testing, and he sent them into independent labs to see what was going on. So some of the weird findings that Gabe received from the lab analysis, one of the cows was found to be high in a drug called atropine, which is used to kind of speed up the heart rate, and generally in a hospital setting. Maybe it was used to speed up the heart rate so that blood would pump out faster. They did find puncture wounds in the jugulars of these cows. I don't know if they were found universally in all of them, but they definitely did find those in some of them. That does suggest how they were exsanguinated or drained of blood. One of the cows was found to be high in vitamin B12. B12 contains the element cobalt, which can be related to nuclear fallout, cobalt-60. Many were found to have blackleg, which is very common in young cows. Well, I shouldn't say it's very common, but it will kill young cows. And there's a vaccine that ranchers will give to their cows to prevent it. I don't see how they would have a cow with blackleg and then say, oh, think that this is a mutilated cow, when they would know the difference. Here are a couple of interesting findings. According to Gabe's notes, a lot of investigators in the area would get nausea and vomiting. And he thought that was possibly an indicator of radiation sickness. And at one point, he thought that the reason that there was pink blood found around the nostrils of these cows, he thought that was also an indication of radiation. However, it could just simply be blood mixed with serous fluid, or at least that's what I heard Weird Reads with Emily Louise say. And I think that actually makes a lot of sense. But I would say the most interesting of all of the clues that he uncovered was the fact that scavengers would not feed on these animals. Because of his theory about radiation at the sites, he was put into contact with a Dr. Howard Burgess of Sandia National Labs. Well, he was actually retired from there. Burgess had some pedigree. He'd actually worked on the first hydrogen bomb. He was part of that team. And Burgess came and he tested the area for radiation, and he found that they tested positive for it. Meanwhile, Gabe theorized that since all of these mutilations were happening at night, the cows must be marked in some way so that the aircraft that was flying over could find them. Of course, his working theory was that it was some sort of aircraft based on the fact that they weren't finding any tracks to or from the sites. And Burgess came up with the idea of looking at the cows through a black light to kind of see if there's any UV marking. And lo and behold, they found 6 cows that did have UV markings on them. And they ended up removing the fur that was marked with UV, and Manuel Gomez sold those cows to somebody else. I don't know if that person later on found a mutilated cow on his property, but if he did, then shame on Manuel Gomez. But it's a little bit odd because they didn't really run that theory through. In order to confirm that the UV was the indicator that these flying objects were using was UV radiation coming from the cow's hide, you'd have to wait to see if the cows that have UV markings get mutilated. And they didn't wait around for that. So I don't know that that test really proved anything, but Howard Burgess really inserted himself into Gabe Valdez's investigations. And at first you would think that's quite lucky because he has such expertise, but it turns out he wasn't that lucky. When Burgess took samples of radiation from the cattle mutilation sites, he didn't take any background samples. And so it could just be the radiation from the area was a little bit higher than it is on average, which can just happen. So that wasn't very helpful of him. And something else happened later on that would really call Howard Burgess's credibility into question. The cattle mutilation phenomena was getting a lot of attention, so much so that Senator Floyd Haskell of Colorado called for an investigation. So in March of 1979, Kenneth Rommel, who was a retired FBI agent, was awarded a $50,000 grant to investigate these cattle mutilations. And according to Greg Valdez, he didn't actually investigate one cattle mutilation. He never went to one site. I think he called around and maybe talked to a few people, but never actually investigated anything specific, and really didn't seem to be that interested in conducting an actual investigation. And ultimately, he would write a 300-page report saying this is just animal predation, it's nothing out of the ordinary. He would also suggest that perhaps the cows had been lifted by a large eagle. I would say that's a pretty insane theory to put forth in an official government report. Maybe a large eagle picked up your cow. But something he found that actually did have some credibility was evidence of white paint submitted as some sort of anomalous substance. And who was it submitted by? None other than Howard Burgess. So on July 2nd, 1978, over Taos, New Mexico, there was a UFO sighting and several people saw it. But interestingly, they saw it deposit some sort of material on this guy's car. And it looked like white paint. But Howard Burgess sent it in for independent testing from a gentleman named Schoenfeld. The testing found evidence of all of these strange elements. Well, not that strange. Potassium and magnesium. But when Kenneth Rommel tested it, it was just white paint. So that's weird. Either Schoenfeld was wrong or Burgess was wrong, or they were both wrong about something that they shouldn't be wrong about. It was as though armchair investigator Kenneth Rommel knew exactly where to look to find evidence that he could tear apart. That's just me theorizing. When he wrote this in his final report, he actually gave Burgess the opportunity to defend himself, maybe submit another sample and prove that what he'd collected from that car was actually some sort of strange foreign material. But he didn't do anything. He didn't really defend himself at all, kind of making it seem like, yeah, it was just white paint, which is embarrassing. So then the question is, was Howard Burgess just an enthusiastic idiot, or was he sent in on purpose to kind of muddy the investigation? I've observed too much fucked up shit going on in this country not to be a staunch conspiracy theorist at this point in time. Based on some information that comes out later, I think Howard Burgess might have been sent in to muddy the waters. We have to talk about another series of highly anomalous events to take place in the late 70s, early 80s, back in Dulce, New Mexico. A lot of people in the town were reporting seeing very strange lights in the sky. Gabe Valdez didn't have any problem believing them because he was seeing them too on a regular basis. And one area in particular was the Mundo Ridge mountain range. But Gabe Valdez and some other police officers from the local Jicarilla tribal police. The Jicarilla reservation was nearby, and they were also finding mutilated cows on a regular basis. And so they would see these lights in the sky. They all suspected that somehow they were related to the cattle mutilations. So they would try to chase after them, and usually they were unsuccessful. But one night, something interesting happened. The Jicarilla policemen saw something in the sky in the evening, and they immediately radioed over to Gabe Valdez to see if he wanted to give chase. And he was nearby as well, so they started chasing this thing, and it was evading them quite easily. Maybe it was even kind of playing with them. And then Gabe had the idea of communicating over CB radio in Apache instead of English. When they did that, the claim is that Valdez and the Jicarilla police had no problem cornering this thing. They surrounded it, and he said it was 150 feet by 150 feet. So this thing was gargantuan, and it was just kind of hanging there
with police cars around it.
And they didn't know what to do. And so they just started shooting at it. And then it just flew away. So I don't know how they were able to corner a flying object. That sounds a little bit ridiculous to me. Maybe it was still just playing with them. I don't know. But what happened later, according to Valdez, is that as he was driving home, he saw a UFO in his rear end. As he was driving home, he started hearing screechy loud noises coming from his radio. And then he saw the UFO in his rearview mirror. And it just flew over him and then away. And he felt like that was sort of the UFO kind of giving him the middle finger. So I think that these things were sort of playing with the policeman there. He seemed to think that he gained a lot of traction on it by simply not speaking any English. So if it's aliens, then it is interesting to find out that aliens only speak English. And another interesting finding is that one night, Gabe would look around with a night vision scope, and he saw an orange light in the sky. And he said that several sort of baby orange lights came out from it, or little tiny UFOs came out from it, flew around, and then came back and merged back into the orange UFO. That's what he saw. What kind of technology is this that can only be seen with night vision glasses? I don't know. There was a gravestone near Manuel Gomez's property. And this gravestone they started noticing was glowing at night. According to Greg Valdez, there was a light that seemed to be glowing above this gravestone. How? I have no idea. And they thought maybe it was serving as sort of a marker for flying objects above. I don't know why they would need that gravestone to be able to navigate, but that was their best theory. And so Gabe Valdez one night went over to the gravestone to investigate. But meanwhile, another officer was a further distance away, and he could see Gabe Valdez near the gravestone at a distance. He said that the light above it was still glowing, but Gabe Valdez reported that it was completely off. He was like, oh, there's no light here at all. But the officer from far away could see it glowing perfectly well, which is just an interesting clue. So as I've probably made it very clear, the working theory was that these UFOs were somehow tied to the cattle mutilations. I think that's a pretty strong theory, given they're both two kind of highly anomalous phenomena all happening at the same time. Yeah, and I know that you're probably wondering when I'm going to finally get to the part where the United States poisons America with nuclear waste. And I'm going to get to that soon. But this next part is just crazy. In 1980, a very well-known paranormal researcher, Linda Moulton Howe, released the most popular cult classic documentary on cattle mutilations. Okay, maybe it's the only cult classic documentary on cattle mutilations, but this is an iconic piece of work. It was a documentary about cattle mutilations, and it was called A Strange Harvest. Many people who are in the UFO community are diehard Linda Moulton Howe fans. They know her work very well. She's been doing this ever since 1980, and she researches all kinds of crazy stuff. Obviously, the documentary is about cattle mutilations, but then she kind of takes a strange turn in the documentary. She brings in a Dr. Leo Sprinkle, yes, that's his real name, who is a regression hypnosis psychiatrist. And Leo Sprinkle was to regress a Mrs. Judy Doraty. This particular regression hypnosis session would essentially put Linda Moulton Howe on the map. So who was Judy Doraty? Well, the question isn't so much who was Judy Doraty, rather what the hell happened to Judy Doraty? So in May of 1973, Doraty was driving home from playing bingo in Houston, Texas. And in the car with her was her mother, her brother, and her sister-in-law, as well as her daughter. All of the people in the car saw strange light in the sky, and they were all like, what in the world is that? And then nothing happened after that. Or at least she doesn't remember anything that happened after that. But for the next 5 years, she would just suffer with these migraine headaches. She would have these huge anxiety attacks, and she just felt like there was something she needed to know about that night. That's interesting. Why did she feel like that? I've never felt that way about anything. And so finally, in 1978, she decided to do a regression hypnosis session. And she did this with a Dr. Rose Tennant. Dr. Tennant had been sort of in the conventional medical path for a while, but then had a sort of a spiritual awakening and got into a lot of sort of more woo-woo stuff. Now, of course, we're very open-minded to that here, but did she take it a little too far? We'll find out. But anyway, Judy Doraty had that regression hypnosis session with Dr. Tennant, and it was helpful, but she felt like there was more to uncover from that night. And somehow her tape from the regression session landed in Linda Moulton Howe's hands. And when Howe listened to these tapes, she knew she had to get Judy Doraty in her documentary. So on March 13th, 1980, Dr. Leo Sprinkle puts Judy Doraty under hypnosis and takes her back to that night.
Now you're standing outside your car. Now you're looking up. You can describe your impressions. What are your impressions?
It's like a spotlight that's shining down on the back of my car. And it's like it has substance to it. I can see an animal being taken up in this. I can see it squirming and trying to get free. And it's like it's being sucked up. It's taken into some sort of chamber. It's a little round, tiny room. And I get nauseated at watching how they excise parts. It's done very quickly, but the calf doesn't die immediately. For some reason, the calf's heart isn't taken, and I don't know. It seems like it's still living, and that upset me very much. And then I can see the calf being lowered. It's like it's being dropped back down. And when it's on the ground, it's dead. I can see that it's not moving. But I feel very sick to my stomach at what I witnessed.
Judy describes seeing an animal taken up into a spotlight, and it's like the spotlight has some sort of substance to it, and it's taken into a small round room. And Sprinkle asks her, well, how can you see this from your vantage point? And she says, it's like I'm up in the UFO, but I'm also at my car. And then she sees the cattle mutilation happen. So she sees all of the gory details. And he asks her who she saw, and she says she saw these little men with long claw-like fingers. And then she said they have large hypnotic eyes. Again, with the theme of hypnotic eyes in alien abduction scenarios. Why are they always hypnotic? I've never described anybody as having hypnotic eyes. Even like a really good looking dude, I don't describe him that way. I just say he's hot. But here's where it gets pretty interesting. She says that she feels at ease because they don't seem to have any desire to harm her. And they tell her that this is for the betterment of mankind. And Sprinkle says, oh, are they benevolent and kind? And she says, no. But rather what they're doing is to benefit them as well. Well, what are they doing this for? And she said that it had to do, what they were doing, presumably the cattle mutilation, had to do with nuclear waste or testing. And they had tested a whole lot of things, brain, sewage, plants, all kinds of stuff. And then she says, if you have all this power, why can't you just stop the nuclear damage from happening to begin with? And that's when they get mad at her. They get mad at her for asking questions. That seems like behavior from someone who's trying to hide something. Just get mad so that they won't continue to ask you questions about that thing that you don't want to tell them. It also doesn't seem like alien behavior. I know I don't know any aliens, but I'm just like, this sounds like human behavior, but I have no proof. But I think what made this entire hypnosis session particularly striking for most people who watched it was when Judy realizes that she doesn't really know where her daughter is. So at one point, she knows that her daughter's in the car, but when Sprinkle asks her, hey, where's your daughter? She, for whatever reason, can't seem to find her. And she starts having a full-on, complete freakout under hypnosis, trying to figure out where the hell her daughter is. Because she starts to believe that they're going to do to her daughter what they did to that cow.
I know I have a feeling of fear.
Okay, let yourself go on through the experience. Let yourself go on through the fear. What impressions come to mind?
I just visualize her on a table.
Okay, what happens next?
I'm afraid that it's going to happen to her, what they did to the animal.
Yeah. Just let yourself relax.
Forget it. No, I don't want to.
You can tolerate it. You know it.
No, I can't.
You know it's all right. Just let yourself go on through. Just relax deeply. You know that everything's going to be okay. You see Cindy on the table. What happens next?
I'm just afraid that they're going to hurt her.
If she's acting, that's some of the best acting I've ever seen. It's very convincing that she's truly stressed out. And this convinced a lot of people that there must be something to this alien abduction phenomenon. And of course, it also linked together the cattle mutilation phenomenon and alien abduction as well. Clearly, from this evidence, it was aliens who were abducting the cattle, right? Well, I made the mistake of looking a little bit deeper into this topic because I want to believe it's aliens, and I still believe there might be aliens, but I'm not so sure this is aliens. She uncovered some pretty interesting information that I'm not sure you can find anywhere else. So if you think that's bad, now let's go back to the regression hypnosis done with Judy Doraty and Leo Sprinkle. So if that's true, that genuinely calls into question all of Molten How's credibility for me. After he was done talking, a gentleman walked up to him and he said that he thought he might actually be able to help Gabe Valdez solve his UFO mystery. Paul was flying over Mount Archuleta on one of his normal reconnaissance missions when suddenly he turned tail and got the hell out of there.